The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan air as the medical evacuation team prepared for another routine pickup. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her medical kit one final time, her steady hands betraying none of the exhaustion that had settled deep in her bones after 18 months of deployment. The call had come in just after dawn. A Navy SEAL team had taken casualties during a night operation in the mountains, and they needed immediate medical attention. Maria had seen it all before. In her 3 tours of duty, she had treated everything from minor shrapnel wounds to life-threatening injuries that would haunt most people's nightmares. But the SEALs were different. They were the elite, the ones who walked into the darkest corners of the world and came back alive. Treating them required a special kind of skill and nerve that Maria had earned through years of experience under fire. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Maria could see the SEAL team waiting in formation. Even from a distance, she could tell they were tense. These weren't men who showed weakness easily, but something about their posture told her this wasn't going to be a simple extraction. The team leader, a tall man with graying temples, stepped forward as the helicopter touched down. His face was grim, and there was something in his eyes that Maria couldn't quite read. The wounded SEAL was conscious but pale, a makeshift tourniquet wrapped around his left leg. Blood had soaked through his uniform, and Maria could see the telltale signs of significant blood loss. She moved quickly, her training taking over as she assessed the injury. The bullet had shattered his femur, and she could see fragments of bone through the torn flesh. It was bad, but she had seen worse. As Maria worked to stabilize the patient, she became aware of an unusual silence among the team. Normally, SEALs would be talking, joking, or at least asking questions about their teammates' condition, but this group stood in complete silence, watching her every move with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Their team leader, who had introduced himself simply as Commander Hayes, kept glancing between Maria and his wounded teammate with an expression she couldn't decipher. The injured SEAL, despite his pain, was also staring at Maria with an odd look in his eyes. She had seen that look before, recognition mixed with something else. Fear, respect? She couldn't tell, and she didn't have time to figure it out. Her job was to keep him alive long enough to get him to the field hospital, and that required all of her concentration. Maria worked efficiently, starting an IV line and administering pain medication while stabilizing the leg fracture. The SEAL who had told her his name was Petty Officer Rodriguez remained conscious throughout the procedure. He kept trying to say something, but the pain medication was making him drowsy, and his words came out as mumbled fragments that Maria couldn't understand. As the helicopter lifted off, Maria noticed that Commander Hayes had insisted on riding along to the hospital. This was unusual. Team leaders rarely accompanied wounded teammates on medical evacuations unless the injuries were life-threatening. Rodriguez's injury was serious but not critical enough to warrant that level of concern. Something else was going on, and Maria could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. During the flight, Commander Hayes sat across from Maria, his eyes never leaving her face. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke over the noise of the rotor blades. "Sergeant Santos, I need to ask you something." His voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Maria had learned to recognize in combat veterans.
Have you ever served in Fallujah?
The question hit Maria like a physical blow. Fallujah. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years, and hearing it now brought back a flood of memories she had spent considerable effort trying to bury. Her hands never stopped working on Rodriguez's IV, but she felt her chest tighten and her breathing become shallow. "Yes, sir. I was there in 2006 and 2007. Commander Hayes nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "Second Battle of Fallujah. You were attached to the 1st Marine Division." It wasn't a question. Somehow this man knew details about her service record that most people in her current unit didn't even know. Maria felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the helicopter's air conditioning. Rodriguez stirred on the stretcher, his eyes opening despite the pain medication. When he saw Maria's face, his expression changed completely. The look of recognition became more pronounced, and he tried to sit up despite his injuries. "Holy shit," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. "You're the Angel of Fallujah." The nickname hit Maria like a sledgehammer. She hadn't heard those words in over 15 years, and hearing them now made her hands shake for the first time since she had begun treating Rodriguez. Commander Hayes was watching her reaction carefully, and she could see understanding dawning in his eyes. Somehow these SEALs knew about Fallujah. They knew about the things she had done there, the things she had tried so hard to forget. Maria forced herself to concentrate on her patient, but her mind was racing. The Angel of Fallujah? That's what the Marines had called her after the incident, after the day that had changed everything, the day that had earned her a chest full of medals and a lifetime of nightmares. She had thought that part of her life was buried, forgotten by everyone except the men who had been there with her. As the helicopter approached the field hospital, Maria could see the medical team waiting on the landing pad. In a few minutes, Rodriguez would be their responsibility, and she could return to her base and try to process what had just happened. But she had a sinking feeling that this encounter was far from over. The way Commander Hayes was looking at her told her that the SEALs had questions, and they weren't going to let her walk away without answers. The helicopter touched down, and Maria helped transfer Rodriguez to the waiting medical team. As they wheeled him toward the hospital, he reached out and grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "Thank you," he said, his eyes clear despite the medication. "For everything, not just today." Then he was gone, disappearing through the hospital doors, leaving Maria standing on the landing pad with Commander Hayes and a weight of memories she had hoped never to carry again. 3 days passed before Commander Hayes found Maria again. She had been hoping the encounter on the helicopter was a one-time thing, that the SEALs would move on to their next mission and forget about the medic who had treated their teammate. But as she sat in the mess tent picking at her dinner and trying to focus on a worn paperback novel, she saw him approaching her table with the measured stride of a man on a mission. "Sergeant Santos, mind if I join you?" Hayes asked, though he was already pulling out a chair before she could answer. Up close in the fluorescent lighting of the mess tent, Maria could see the lines around his eyes and the gray threading through his hair. This was a man who had seen decades of combat, and the weight of those experiences was etched into every line of his face. Maria closed her book and set it aside. "How's Rodriguez doing?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She had checked with the hospital twice in the past 3 days, using the excuse of following up on her patient to mask her genuine concern for the wounded SEAL. "He'll live. Full recovery expected thanks to your work." Hayes paused, studying her face. "He's been asking about you. They all have, actually. Word spreads fast in the special operations community, especially when it involves someone with your particular history." The food in Maria's mouth suddenly tasted like cardboard. She had always known this day might come, when someone would connect the dots between Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the quiet medic who kept to herself, and the woman who had earned a reputation that followed her like a shadow. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but even she could hear how unconvincing the words sounded. Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression patient but determined. November 15th, 2006, Fallujah. You were attached to Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 8th Marines. Your convoy was hit by an IED, and then you came under sustained enemy fire from multiple positions. 3 Marines were critically wounded, and your position was surrounded. Maria's hands clenched involuntarily around her water bottle. The memories came flooding back despite her best efforts to keep them buried. The smell of burning diesel fuel, the screaming of wounded men, the sound of bullets hitting metal and concrete, the weight of her medical bag as she crawled from one casual Marine to another, knowing that every second counted between life and death. "You don't need to do this," Maria said quietly. "Whatever you think you know about that day, just leave it alone." But Hayes continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The Marines called for air support, but the enemy positions were too close to your location. They couldn't risk it. So for 4 hours you kept 3 critically wounded Marines alive while under constant enemy fire. You performed emergency surgery in the middle of a firefight, using nothing but your field medical kit and whatever supplies you could scavenge from the wreckage." Maria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Several other soldiers in the mess tent looked over, curious about the commotion. "I said leave it alone," she said, her voice carrying an edge that made Hayes pause. But he didn't back down. "Sit down, Sergeant, please." His voice was gentler now, less commanding and more human. "I'm not here to dredge up painful memories for entertainment. There's a reason I need to know about that day, and it has everything to do with why my team froze when they recognized you." Against her better judgment, Maria sat back down. Something in Hayes' tone told her that this conversation was inevitable, and putting it off would only make things worse. "What do you want to know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hayes pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages before finding what he was looking for. According to the after-action report, you single-handedly kept 3 Marines alive for 4 hours under sustained enemy fire. Staff Sergeant Williams had a severed femoral artery. Corporal Johnson had a punctured lung and was going into shock. Private First Class Anderson had shrapnel in his abdomen and was bleeding internally. Each name hit Maria like a punch to the gut. She hadn't heard those names spoken aloud in years, but she remembered each face with perfect clarity. Williams, the tough-as-nails staff sergeant who had cried when she saved his life. Johnson, barely 19 years old and scared out of his mind. Anderson, who had joined the Marines to pay for college and ended up fighting for his life in a foreign desert. You performed a field tracheotomy on Johnson using a ballpoint pen and a knife. Hayes continued. You stopped Williams's bleeding by applying pressure for 2 straight hours while treating the other casualties. And you removed shrapnel from Anderson's abdomen using surgical instruments from your kit, all while enemy bullets were hitting the wreckage around you. Maria closed her eyes, but the memories were too strong now to push away. She could still feel the sticky warmth of blood on her hands, still hear the sound of Williams gasping for air as she worked to stop his bleeding. She could remember the weight of Johnson's life in her hands as she performed the emergency tracheotomy, knowing that one wrong move would kill him. When reinforcements finally arrived, Hayes said, his voice softer now, they found you still working on Anderson, covered in blood that wasn't your own. The Marines you saved said you never stopped working, never showed fear, never even flinched when bullets were hitting all around you. They said you were like an angel, completely focused on saving lives while everything else was falling apart. That's where the nickname had come from, the Angel of Fallujah. At first it had been used with respect and admiration, but as the story spread and grew in the telling, it had become something else. A legend that Maria could never live up to. A reputation that followed her wherever she went in the military. People expected her to be superhuman, to perform miracles under impossible circumstances. They forgot that she was just a person who had done her job under terrible conditions. All 3 Marines survived, Hayes said, closing his notebook. Williams retired as a master sergeant and became a police officer in Detroit. Johnson finished his tour and went to college on the GI Bill. Anderson did 2 more deployments before getting out and starting a family. They're all alive today because of what you did that day. Maria opened her eyes and looked at Hayes. Why are you telling me all this? What does this have to do with your SEAL team? Hayes was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Maria understand why men followed him into combat. Because Rodriguez was there that day, Sergeant. He was a young Marine then, part of the quick reaction force that came to pull you out. He was one of the Marines who found you still working on Anderson when they secured the area. The world seemed to tilt slightly as Maria processed this information. Rodriguez had been there. He had seen her at her lowest point, covered in blood and trauma, doing whatever it took to keep her patients alive. No wonder he had recognized her. No wonder the entire SEAL team had reacted the way they did. He's never forgotten that day, Hayes continued. None of them have. In the special operations community, we hear stories about people who go above and beyond, who do impossible things under impossible circumstances. Your story has become one of those legends. When Rodriguez realized who you were, when he told the rest of the team, they all knew exactly who they were dealing with. Maria felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. Pride, embarrassment, fear, and something she couldn't quite identify. I just did my job, she said, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. No, Hayes said firmly. You did much more than that. And that's why we need to talk. The next morning, Maria found herself sitting in a small briefing room that smelled of coffee and military bureaucracy. Commander Hayes had asked her to meet him there, saying only that there were things she needed to know about Rodriguez's mission and why her past had suddenly become relevant to a Navy SEAL operation. She had barely slept the night before, her mind churning with memories she had tried to bury and questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Hayes entered the room carrying a thick manila folder and a laptop computer. He looked tired, as if he had spent the night wrestling with his own demons. Behind him came another man Maria didn't recognize. A Navy captain with the bearing of someone who spent more time behind a desk than in the field, but whose eyes held the sharp intelligence of a career intelligence officer. Sergeant Santos. This is Captain Morrison from Naval Intelligence, Hayes said as they sat down across from her. What I'm about to tell you is classified. and you'll need to sign some paperwork before we can continue. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. In her experience, conversations that started with classified paperwork rarely ended well for the people involved. But she had come this far, and her curiosity about Rodriguez and the SEAL team's reaction was stronger than her caution. She signed the documents Morrison placed in front of her without reading them carefully, a decision she would later regret. Morrison opened the laptop and turned it toward Maria. On the screen was a photograph of a man in his 50s with graying hair and intense dark eyes. He was wearing civilian clothes, but something about his posture and expression screamed military training. "Do you recognize this man?" Morrison asked. Maria studied the photograph carefully, but the face was unfamiliar. "No, I don't think so. Should I?" "His name is Ahmad Hassan," Morrison said. "He's a former Iraqi Republican Guard officer who disappeared during the chaos, following the fall of Baghdad in 2003. Intelligence suggests he's been organizing insurgent activities in western Iraq for the past 15 years, specifically targeting American medical personnel and evacuation operations." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. Targeting medical personnel. She had always known that medics were valuable targets for enemy forces. They saved American lives, which made them legitimate military targets in the minds of insurgents. But the idea that someone was specifically hunting medical personnel made her stomach turn. Hayes leaned forward, his expression grim. "Hassan has been responsible for at least a dozen attacks on medical convoys and evacuation helicopters over the past 5 years. His methods are sophisticated and his intelligence is always accurate. He knows exactly when and where American medical operations are taking place, which suggests he has sources inside our logistics network." Morrison clicked to the next slide, which showed a map of Iraq with red dots marking various locations. "These are the sites of Hassan's confirmed attacks. Notice anything unusual about the pattern?" Maria studied the map, her military training helping her identify the tactical significance of the marked locations. The attacks were clustered around major transportation routes and known medical evacuation sites, but there was something else. "They're all places where medical personnel would be most vulnerable," she said. "Locations where medics would have to expose themselves to treat casualties." "Exactly," Morrison said. "Hassan doesn't just target medical personnel randomly. He studies their methods, their procedures, their psychology. He knows that American medics will risk everything to save lives, and he uses that knowledge against them." Hayes pulled out a photograph from his folder and placed it on the table in front of Maria. It was a surveillance photo, grainy and taken from a distance, but she could clearly see herself treating a wounded soldier near a damaged Humvee. The timestamp on the photo was from just 3 weeks ago. "This was taken during your last medical evacuation mission. Hassan's people were watching you, Sergeant. They've been watching you for months." Maria's blood ran cold as she stared at the photograph. The idea that enemy forces had been observing her, studying her methods, planning potential attacks against her patients, was more terrifying than any direct threat to her own life. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me specifically?" Morrison and Hayes exchanged a look that told Maria there was more to this story than they had revealed so far. Morrison closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Because you're not just any medic, Sergeant. You're the Angel of Fallujah. Your reputation precedes you, and that reputation makes you a very valuable target. Hassan knows about Fallujah," Hayes continued. "He knows about the 3 Marines you saved, about the 4 hours under fire, about everything that happened that day. In his mind, you represent everything he hates about American military medicine. The ability to save lives under impossible circumstances, to deny him the psychological victories that come from inflicting casualties." Maria felt sick. The thing she was most proud of, the day that had defined her military career and earned her the respect of her peers, had also painted a target on her back that she had never known existed. "How does he know about Fallujah?" she asked. "Intelligence suggests he has been collecting information about high-profile American military personnel for years," Morrison explained. "Your actions in Fallujah were widely reported in military channels, and Hassan has sources throughout the region. He's been building dossiers on American service members he considers high-value targets." Hayes pulled out another document and placed it in front of Maria. It was a detailed intelligence report written in Arabic, with an English translation attached. "This was recovered from a safe house we raided last month. It's Hassan's file on you, Sergeant. He knows your deployment history, your unit assignments, even details about your medical procedures and techniques. Maria read through the translated document, feeling increasingly violated with each line. Hassan knew things about her that some of her closest friends didn't know. He had detailed descriptions of her medical kit, her standard operating procedures, even her personal habits and preferences. It was like having a stalker who had been watching her for years without her knowledge. Rodriguez's team was hunting Hassan, Hayes said. They had intelligence that he was planning a major attack on a medical evacuation operation, and they were trying to intercept him before he could carry it out. But Hassan knew they were coming. He set up an ambush that was specifically designed to wound, not kill, Rodriguez's team. The pieces were starting to come together in Maria's mind, and she didn't like the picture they were forming. He wanted to draw out medical personnel, she said. The ambush was bait. Exactly, Morrison confirmed. Hassan knew that wounded SEALs would automatically trigger a medical evacuation response. He was counting on it. His plan was to let the medical team arrive, then launch a coordinated attack that would kill everyone involved, the wounded SEALs, the medical personnel, and anyone else who responded to the scene. Maria felt her hands beginning to shake as the full implications of what they were telling her sank in. But the attack never came, she said. Rodriguez was wounded, we evacuated him, and nothing happened. Hayes nodded grimly. Because Hassan's spotters recognized you, Sergeant. When they reported back that the Angel of Fallujah was treating the wounded SEAL, Hassan called off the attack. You weren't the target he was expecting, and your presence changed his entire tactical calculation. He's been planning something bigger, Morrison added, something specifically designed around your capabilities and reputation. The attack on Rodriguez's team was just reconnaissance, a way to confirm that you were still in the area and still actively engaged in medical operations. Maria stared at the intelligence documents spread across the table, trying to process the magnitude of what she was being told. A terrorist leader she had never heard of had been watching her for months, studying her methods, planning attacks around her presence. The reputation that had brought her respect and admiration in the military community had also made her a target for one of the most dangerous insurgent leaders in Iraq. What do you want from me? She asked finally, looking up at Hayes and Morrison. What's the plan? Hayes and Morrison exchanged another look, and Maria could see the weight of whatever decision they were wrestling with. Finally, Hayes spoke. We want to use you as bait, Sergeant. We want to give Hassan exactly what he's been planning for, and then take him down when he makes his move. The room fell silent as Maria absorbed the implications of what Hayes was asking. They wanted her to deliberately put herself in danger, to use her reputation and Hassan's obsession with her as a weapon against him. It was a plan that could save countless lives if it worked, but it would require her to face the very demons she had been trying to escape since Fallujah. Maria spent the next 2 days wrestling with Hayes's proposal. The plan was audacious and dangerous. They wanted her to participate in a fake medical evacuation mission designed to draw Hassan and his forces into an ambush. She would be the bait, the prize that Hassan had been waiting for, while SEAL teams positioned around the area would close the trap when he made his move. The military side of her brain understood the tactical logic. Hassan had been responsible for killing dozens of American service members, and his focus on medical personnel made him a particular threat to people like her. Taking him down would save lives and disrupt a significant insurgent network. But the human side of her was terrified at the prospect of deliberately walking into a trap, even one designed to protect her. She found herself sitting in the base chapel at 0300, staring at the simple wooden cross and trying to find some kind of guidance in the silence. The chapel was empty except for her, and the quiet felt both peaceful and oppressive at the same time. She had never been particularly religious, but something about the sacred space helped her think more clearly about the impossible choice she was facing. Can't sleep either. Maria turned to see Rodriguez hobbling into the chapel on crutches, his wounded leg heavily bandaged but healing well. She had been avoiding him since learning about his connection to Fallujah, unsure how to handle the fact that he had witnessed her at her most vulnerable moment. What are you doing here? She asked. Shouldn't you be in the hospital? Rodriguez made his way to the pew behind her and sat down with a grimace. They discharged me this morning. Light duty for the next 6 weeks, but I'm mobile enough to get around. He was quiet for a moment, studying her profile in the dim light filtering through the chapel windows. Hayes told me about the mission they proposed, about using you to get to Hassan. Maria turned to face him, seeing her own conflicted emotions reflected in his dark eyes. And what do you think about it? I think it's the most dangerous thing they could ask you to do, Rodriguez said without hesitation. Hassan isn't just some random insurgent. He's smart, he's patient, and he's been planning this for months. The odds of something going wrong are pretty high. It wasn't what Maria had expected to hear from a SEAL, especially one who had been hunting Hassan for weeks before getting wounded. But, she prompted, sensing there was more to his opinion. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Maria understand why he had earned his place among the elite special operations community. But I also know what kind of person you are. I saw it in Fallujah 15 years ago, and I saw it again when you treated me 3 days ago. You don't make decisions based on what's safe or easy. You make them based on what's right. I was 23 years old in Fallujah, Maria said. I didn't know any better. I just did what I had to do to keep people alive. That's exactly my point, Rodriguez replied. You didn't hesitate then, and you won't hesitate now if you think it's the right thing to do. The question isn't whether you can handle the mission. It's whether you can live with yourself if you don't try. Maria knew he was right, but that didn't make the decision any easier. Tell me about that day, she said. Tell me what you saw when your team found us. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably on the hard wooden pew, his wounded leg making it difficult to find a comfortable position. We got the call around 1400 that Bravo Company was in trouble. Heavy contact, multiple casualties unable to extract on their own. It took us 2 hours to fight our way to your position because Hassan's people had set up a defensive perimeter around the whole area. He paused, lost in the memory of that chaotic afternoon. When we finally broke through, I expected to find a disaster. 3 critically wounded Marines, a surrounded medic, enemy forces all around. What I found instead was you. Completely calm, completely focused, still working on Anderson even though the firefight was still going on. Maria remembered that moment too, but from a very different perspective. She had been exhausted, covered in blood, and running on pure adrenaline and determination. The arrival of the quick reaction force had felt like a miracle. But she had been too focused on her patients to fully appreciate her rescue. Williams was conscious and talking when we found him. Rodriguez continued. Johnson was breathing normally thanks to the tracheotomy you had performed. Anderson was stable and his bleeding was controlled. All 3 Marines were alive because you had refused to give up on them, even when the situation was hopeless. It wasn't hopeless, Maria said quietly. As long as they were still breathing, there was always a chance. That's what made you different, Rodriguez said. Most people would have triaged the situation, maybe tried to save 1 or 2 of them. You refused to accept that any of them had to die. You found a way to save all 3, under conditions that should have made it impossible. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Rodriguez spoke again. Hassan knows about that day because it represents everything he's trying to destroy. The idea that American military personnel will risk everything to save each other, that we don't leave people behind, that we don't give up even when the odds are impossible. Your reputation isn't just about what you did in Fallujah, it's about what you represent. Maria felt the weight of that representation settling on her shoulders. She had never asked to become a symbol, never wanted the responsibility that came with the nickname Angel of Fallujah. But somewhere along the way, she had become something larger than herself, and Hassan's obsession with her was proof of that transformation. If I do this, she said, if I agree to the mission, what happens if it goes wrong? What happens if Hassan is smarter than we think? If he sees through the trap? Rodriguez met her eyes directly. Then we adapt and overcome just like we always do. Hayes' team knows what they're doing, and they'll have backup plans for the backup plans. But more importantly, you'll be doing what you do best, saving lives. Even if the mission is bait, there will probably be real casualties that need real medical attention. And if Hassan succeeds? If he kills me and proves whatever point he's trying to make? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then he wins this round, but he doesn't win the war. There are other medics, other people who will step up and continue the mission, but I don't think it will come to that. I've seen you under pressure, Sergeant. You don't break. Maria stood up and walked to the front of the chapel, staring up at the simple wooden cross. In the dim light, it seemed to glow with its own inner radiance. offering comfort without promising easy answers. She thought about the 3 Marines she had saved in Fallujah, about Rodriguez lying wounded on the helicopter, about all the patients she had treated over the years. Each one represented a choice to fight against death and suffering, to refuse to accept that some things were inevitable. "When is the mission supposed to happen?" she asked without turning around. Hayes wants to move fast before Hassan changes his mind or gets suspicious. Probably within the next week. Maria closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling into place. When she opened them again, she felt calmer than she had in days. The choice was still dangerous, still terrifying, but it was also clear. "Tell Hayes I'm in," she said. "But I want to know every detail of the plan, and I want input on the medical aspects of the operation." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the significance of her decision. "Are you sure about this?" Maria turned to face him, and for the first time since learning about Hassan's obsession with her, she felt completely certain about her path forward. 15 years ago, I made a choice to do whatever it took to save 3 Marines. Now I have a chance to make a choice that could save dozens or hundreds of people. How is that even a question? As they left the chapel together, Maria felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But this time it felt different. This time, she was choosing to carry that weight, choosing to face the danger and the demons that came with it. Hassan wanted the Angel of Fallujah. He was going to get her. The briefing room was packed with more military personnel than Maria had ever seen in one place outside of a formal ceremony. SEAL team operators, Army Rangers, Air Force pilots, intelligence analysts, and communications specialists filled every available chair and lined the walls. The energy in the room was electric, the kind of focused intensity that came before major combat operations. Commander Hayes stood at the front of the room next to a large tactical map of the operational area. Red pins marked known enemy positions. Blue pins showed friendly forces, and a single green pin marked the location where Maria would be positioned during the mission. Looking at the map, she could see how exposed and vulnerable that green pin looked, surrounded by terrain that offered dozens of potential ambush sites. "Operation Angel's Gambit will commence at 600 tomorrow," Hayes announced to the assembled team. "The mission is simple in concept but complex in execution. We're going to give Hassan exactly what he's been waiting for, chance to capture or kill the Angel of Fallujah, and then we're going to destroy him and his entire network when he takes the bait." Hayes clicked a remote control, and the map was replaced by a detailed satellite image of a rocky valley about 30 kilometers from the base. "Intelligence suggests Hassan has been positioning his forces in this area for the past week. We've confirmed at least 40 enemy fighters, including several with advanced weapons and communications equipment. He's not taking any chances with this operation." Maria studied the satellite image, noting the caves and rocky outcroppings that would provide excellent cover for enemy forces. It was terrain that heavily favored the defenders, and she could see why Hassan had chosen it for his ambush site. Any medical evacuation team responding to casualties in that valley would be surrounded and vulnerable. "The scenario is straightforward," Hayes continued. "A joint Army-Marine patrol will enter the valley on a routine reconnaissance mission. At approximately 0800, they will trigger a simulated IED attack that will create realistic casualties requiring immediate medical evacuation. Sergeant Santos will respond as part of the normal medical team, and Hassan's forces will attempt to capture or kill her." Captain Morrison stepped forward with a laptop computer and began typing. "We've been feeding Hassan's intelligence network false information for the past week, making it appear that Sergeant Santos will be on duty for medical evacuations in this area. Our communications intercepts suggest he's taken the bait and is positioning his forces accordingly." Maria felt her stomach tighten as the full scope of the deception became clear. They weren't just using her as bait. They were using elaborate false intelligence and staged casualties to create the perfect trap. The level of planning and coordination involved was impressive, but it also highlighted just how dangerous Hassan considered her to be. "What about the casualties?" she asked. "If we're simulating an IED attack, there need to be realistic injuries for me to treat, or Hassan will know it's a setup." Hayes nodded approvingly. "Good question. We'll be using combat actors, volunteers from the units involved who will simulate realistic battlefield injuries using special effects, makeup, and techniques. Your job will be to treat them as if they were real casualties, maintaining the illusion while our teams move into position. A SEAL operator near the back of the room raised his hand. What's the extraction plan if things go sideways? If Hassan's forces are stronger than we expect, or if they manage to break through our perimeter? Multiple backup plans, Hayes replied. We'll have Apache helicopters standing by for close air support, plus additional ground forces positioned within rapid response distance. But the key to this operation is patience. We need to let Hassan commit fully to his attack before we spring the trap. Maria could see the tactical logic, but she also understood the risks involved. If Hassan was smarter than they anticipated, if he saw through the deception or changed his tactics at the last minute, she would be left exposed and vulnerable in the middle of a firefight. The success of the entire operation depended on her ability to maintain the illusion, while dozens of enemy fighters tried to kill her. What about communications? She asked. How do I coordinate with your teams while maintaining the medical evacuation cover? Morrison pulled out a small device that looked like a standard military radio, but was obviously more sophisticated. Modified communication system. To anyone monitoring radio traffic, it will sound like normal medical evacuation chatter, but there's a secondary frequency that will allow you to communicate directly with our teams if the situation changes. Rodriguez, who had insisted on attending the briefing despite his wounded leg, spoke up from his position near the door. What's the contingency plan if Hassan decides to take her alive instead of killing her? Intelligence suggests he's interested in making a propaganda statement, which would require keeping her alive long enough to create a video or other media. The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications of that possibility. Being captured by Hassan would be worse than being killed outright. And Maria felt a chill run down her spine as she imagined what kind of propaganda value a captured Angel of Fallujah would have for insurgent forces. Hayes exchanged a look with Morrison before answering. If Hassan attempts to capture Sergeant Santos, we accelerate the timeline and move to immediate extraction. We won't allow her to be taken alive under any circumstances. The finality in Hayes's voice was both comforting and terrifying. It meant they would do everything possible to prevent her capture, but it also implied that they were prepared to take extreme measures if necessary. The unspoken message was clear. If capture seemed imminent, they would rather see her dead than in Hassan's hands. Any other questions? Hayes asked, scanning the room full of operators and specialists. When no one responded, he nodded to Morrison, who began distributing detailed operation orders to each team leader. As the briefing broke up and people began filing out of the room, Maria found herself standing alone near the tactical map, staring at that single green pin that represented her position during the mission. The weight of what she had agreed to do was starting to sink in, and she felt a familiar mixture of fear and determination that she remembered from Fallujah. Second thoughts? Rodriguez asked, approaching her on his crutches. Every soldier has second thoughts before a mission like this, Maria replied. The key is not letting them paralyze you. Rodriguez nodded, understanding the psychology of pre-mission anxiety better than most. You know, in all my years as a SEAL, I've never seen an operation planned around one person the way this one is planned around you. That's either a testament to how important you are, or how dangerous Hassan considers you to be. Probably both, Maria said, still studying the map. The question is whether I can live up to the reputation that got me into this situation in the first place. You saved 3 Marines under impossible circumstances, Rodriguez reminded her. You've treated hundreds of casualties under fire over multiple deployments. You've already proven you can handle pressure that would break most people. Tomorrow is just another day at work. Maria appreciated his confidence, but she knew that tomorrow would be unlike any other mission she had ever undertaken. In Fallujah, she had been reacting to circumstances beyond her control, doing whatever was necessary to keep her patients alive. Tomorrow she would be deliberately walking into danger, using herself as bait to lure one of the most dangerous insurgent leaders in Iraq into a trap. As she left the briefing room and headed back to her quarters to prepare for the mission, Maria thought about the 3 Marines she had saved 15 years ago. Williams, Johnson, and Anderson were all alive today, because she had refused to give up on them when the situation seemed hopeless. Tomorrow she would have a chance to save dozens or hundreds of other American service members by helping to eliminate Hassan and his network. The Angel of Fallujah was about to spread her wings again, and this time she was flying directly into the storm. The pre-dawn air was crisp and still as Maria performed her final equipment check in the helicopter. Her medical kit was organized exactly the way she preferred, with supplies arranged for maximum efficiency under stress. She had added extra trauma supplies and blood clotting agents, knowing that if the mission went according to plan, she might have to treat real casualties before it was over. The flight to the target area took 23 minutes, during which Maria focused on controlling her breathing and reviewing the mission timeline in her mind. At 0750, the simulated patrol would trigger the fake IED. At 0755, the medical evacuation call would go out. At 0800, her helicopter would land in the valley, and she would begin treating the simulated casualties. Somewhere between 0800 and 0830, Hassan's forces would attack. 5 minutes out, the pilot announced over the intercom. Through the helicopter's windows, Maria could see the rocky valley spread out below them, looking deceptively peaceful in the early morning light. Somewhere in those rocks and caves, dozens of enemy fighters were waiting for her arrival, and dozens of American Special Operations personnel were waiting to spring their trap. The radio crackled with chatter from the simulated patrol as they approached their position in the valley. Maria could hear the tension in their voices, even though she knew they were acting. In a few minutes, these men would be lying on the ground with fake wounds, depending on her to maintain the illusion that would draw Hassan into the open. IED. IED, we've got casualties. The voice over the radio was convincing, filled with the panic and urgency that came with real combat situations. Maria felt her heart rate increase as her body responded to the familiar sound of soldiers in distress, even though she knew it was simulated. Medical evacuation requested at grid 312847 came the next transmission. 3 urgent casualties, possible internal injuries, and traumatic amputation. Need immediate dust-off. This was it. Maria took a deep breath and switched into her professional mode. The calm, focused mindset that had carried her through hundreds of real medical emergencies. The fact that this was a simulation didn't matter. Her responses needed to be genuine, or Hassan would see through the deception. The helicopter descended rapidly toward the landing zone, a small cleared area surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent concealment for enemy observers. As they touched down, Maria could see the casualties lying near the wreckage of a Humvee that had been positioned to simulate the results of an IED attack. The special effects were impressive. There was smoke, scattered equipment, and what appeared to be blood splattered across the vehicle. Maria grabbed her medical kit and ran toward the casualties, her training taking over as she assessed the scene. The first patient was a young Army sergeant who was simulating a traumatic leg amputation. The makeup was so realistic that for a moment Maria's breath caught in her throat, memories of real amputees flooding back. "What's your name, soldier?" she asked, kneeling beside him and beginning her assessment. "Sergeant Davis," he replied, his voice weak but steady. "Can't feel my leg." Is it still there?" The performance was convincing enough that Maria found herself responding as if the injury were real. She began applying pressure to the simulated wound site while talking him through the situation, all while scanning the surrounding area for signs of Hassan's forces. The rocks and caves that surrounded the landing zone offered countless hiding spots, and she felt exposed and vulnerable despite knowing that friendly forces were positioned throughout the area. The second casualty was simulating internal injuries, complete with realistic-looking blood that had been applied to his uniform. Maria moved between the patients efficiently, establishing priorities and beginning treatment procedures that would look authentic to anyone observing from a distance. The third casualty was unconscious, simulating a head injury that required immediate attention. As Maria worked, she became aware of movement in the rocks above the landing zone. At first, it was just shadows and brief glimpses of figures repositioning themselves, but gradually she could see that the area was being surrounded. Hassan's forces were moving into position, just as the intelligence had predicted. "Angel Base. This is Angel 1, she spoke into her radio, using the predetermined code words that would alert the SEAL teams to Hassan's presence. "Patients are stable but require immediate transport to surgical facilities." "Copy, Angel 1, came Hayes' voice in response. "Transport en route. Continue treatment." The waiting was the hardest part. Maria continued to work on the simulated casualties, applying bandages and administering fake medications, while dozens of enemy fighters moved into position around her. She could feel eyes watching her from the surrounding rocks, and every instinct she had developed over multiple combat deployments was screaming at her to take cover. At 8:47, Hassan made his move. The attack began with a single sniper shot that shattered the helicopter's main rotor, ensuring that Maria and the casualties wouldn't be able to escape by air. Then came the voices, shouting in Arabic from multiple positions around the valley, as armed figures emerged from concealment and began advancing toward the landing zone. Maria's first instinct was to protect her patients, even though she knew they weren't really injured. She positioned herself between the advancing enemy fighters and the soldiers on the ground, just as she had done 15 years ago in Fallujah. The irony wasn't lost on her. Once again, she was a medic under fire trying to save lives while bullets flew around her. "This is Angel 1, she called into her radio. "We are under attack. Multiple enemy fighters advancing on our position." "Copy, Angel 1. Hayes' voice was calm and professional. "Hold your position. Support is en route." But Maria could see that Hassan's forces were moving faster than anticipated. They had emerged from concealment in coordinated waves, suggesting a level of tactical sophistication that exceeded the intelligence estimates. Within minutes, they would be in position to overrun the landing zone completely. Then she saw him. Ahmad Hassan himself appeared at the edge of the rocks, easily recognizable from the intelligence photographs she had studied. He was older than his picture suggested, with gray threading through his dark hair, but his eyes held the same intense intelligence that had made him such an effective insurgent leader. He was watching her with an expression of satisfaction, as if he couldn't quite believe that his long-planned trap had finally succeeded. Hassan raised his hand, and his fighters stopped their advance. He wanted to savor this moment, Maria realized. He wanted to capture the Angel of Fallujah alive, to prove that American military medicine wasn't invincible. It was exactly the kind of psychological victory that could boost insurgent morale and recruitment throughout the region. "Dr. Santos," Hassan called out in accented but clear English. "The famous Angel of Fallujah. You have been very difficult to find, but your reputation precedes you." Maria continued working on her patients while Hassan spoke, using the conversation to buy time for the SEAL teams to get into position. She could see movement in the rocks behind Hassan's position, subtle shifts in shadow that suggested friendly forces were repositioning themselves for the ambush. "I know who you are, Hassan," she called back. "And I know what you've done to American medical personnel." Hassan smiled, clearly pleased that she recognized him. "You have cost me many opportunities over the years, Doctor. Your skills have saved lives that should have been lost, denied me victories that were rightfully mine, but today that ends." As Hassan continued to talk, Maria caught a glimpse of a figure moving through the rocks behind him. The distinctive shape of night vision goggles and the tactical gear identified him as one of Hayes' SEAL operators, moving into position for the final phase of the trap. The Angel of Fallujah was about to become the bait that ended Ahmad Hassan's war against American medics forever. Hassan's monologue was interrupted by the sharp crack of a sniper rifle from the rocks above. One of his fighters dropped instantly, and suddenly the valley erupted into chaos as SEAL teams emerged from concealed positions throughout the area. The trap had been sprung, and Hassan found himself surrounded by the very forces he had been trying to avoid for months. Maria threw herself over the simulated casualties, protecting them from the crossfire even though she knew their injuries weren't real. Muscle memory and training took over as bullets began flying from multiple directions, and she found herself back in the familiar nightmare of treating patients under fire. The only difference was that this time, she had known it was coming. Hassan's forces were caught completely off guard by the sudden appearance of American Special Operations teams. They had been so focused on capturing Maria that they hadn't noticed the careful positioning of friendly forces around their own positions. Within minutes, the tactical situation had reversed completely, with Hassan's fighters trapped in the bottom of the valley while SEAL snipers controlled the high ground. "Angel 1. This is Overwatch," Hayes' voice came through Maria's earpiece. "Stay down and continue treating your patients. We have this under control." But as Maria looked up from her position, she could see that Hassan himself had managed to avoid the initial ambush. He was moving through the rocks with several of his most loyal fighters, trying to reach an escape route that would take him out of the valley. If he succeeded in getting away, the entire operation would be a failure despite the tactical victory. "Overwatch, this is Angel 1, Maria spoke into her radio. "Hassan is moving toward the North Ridge. He's about to escape. Copy, Angel 1. We have teams moving to intercept." but Maria could see that the SEAL teams were pinned down by enemy fire from multiple positions. Hassan had trained his fighters well, and they were fighting with the desperation of men who knew capture meant death or life imprisonment. The crossfire was so intense that movement across the valley floor was nearly impossible. Maria made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who didn't know her history. She grabbed her medical kit and began moving toward Hassan's position, using her knowledge of battlefield medicine to navigate through the chaos. If she could reach his escape route before he did, she might be able to delay him long enough for the SEAL teams to catch up. Angel 1, what are you doing? Hayes' voice was sharp with concern. Return to your position immediately. Negative, Overwatch, Maria replied, crawling through the rocks as bullets whined overhead. I have a clear line to Hassan's position. I can cut him off. It was the same instinct that had driven her actions in Fallujah 15 years ago. The refusal to accept that some objectives were impossible. The willingness to risk everything to achieve a mission-critical goal. But this time, instead of saving lives, she was trying to prevent a dangerous terrorist from escaping to kill again. Hassan saw her coming and raised his rifle, but hesitated when he realized who was pursuing him. The famous Angel of Fallujah was crawling through a firefight to stop him personally, and the irony of the situation seemed to amuse him, even as bullets flew around them both. You are either very brave or very foolish, Doctor, he called out over the sound of gunfire. Do you really think you can stop me by yourself? Maria didn't answer. She was too focused on reaching the narrow gap in the rocks that represented Hassan's escape route. If she could get there first, if she could hold that position for just a few minutes, the SEAL teams would have time to close the trap completely. She reached the gap just as Hassan arrived from the other direction, and for a moment they stared at each other across the narrow opening. Here was the man who had been hunting her for months, who had planned elaborate attacks designed specifically to kill medical personnel like her, and here she was, a combat medic armed with nothing but her medical kit and the reputation that had made her a target in the first place. Hassan raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a shot rang out from the rocks above. Rodriguez appeared on the ridge, balancing on his crutches and holding a sniper rifle with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. His shot had been perfect, striking Hassan in the shoulder and spinning him around. Maria didn't hesitate. She lunged forward and tackled Hassan as he stumbled, using techniques she had learned in military combat training but had never expected to use against a terrorist leader. They both went down hard against the rocky ground, and Hassan's rifle went flying into the darkness between the rocks. Overwatch, this is Angel 1, Maria gasped into her radio as she struggled to maintain her hold on the wounded Hassan. Target is secured. I repeat, Hassan is secured. Within minutes, SEAL operators swarmed the position, securing Hassan and his remaining fighters. The battle was over almost as quickly as it had begun, with the enemy forces either dead, wounded, or captured. The elaborate trap had worked perfectly, eliminating a significant threat to American forces throughout the region. As medics from the SEAL teams took custody of Hassan and began treating his wounds, Maria found herself sitting on a rock trying to process what had just happened. She had successfully played the role of bait, drawn Hassan into the open, and then personally prevented his escape. The Angel of Fallujah had lived up to her reputation once again, but this time as a warrior rather than just a healer. Rodriguez hobbled over to her position, still carrying the sniper rifle that had ended Hassan's freedom. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the craziest, he said, sitting down beside her. Probably both. I couldn't let him get away, Maria replied. Too many people have died because of him. Too many medics have been targeted because of his obsession with destroying American military medicine. Hayes approached them as the SEAL teams finished securing the area. His expression was a mixture of admiration, relief, and exasperation. Sergeant Santos, what you did today was beyond the call of duty. It was also completely against orders and nearly got you killed. Maria looked up at him, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through her system. Are you going to write me up for it? Hayes smiled for the first time since she had known him. I'm going to recommend you for a Silver Star. What you did today ended Hassan's network and probably saved hundreds of American lives. The Angel of Fallujah has earned her wings again. As the helicopters arrived to extract the teams and their prisoners, Maria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 15 years ago, she had been a young medic who had refused to let 3 Marines die in a burning wreckage. Today she was a veteran who had refused to let a terrorist escape to kill again. The situations were different, but the underlying principle was the same. Never give up. Never accept that some battles can't be won. The nickname Angel of Fallujah had followed her throughout her military career, sometimes as a blessing and sometimes as a burden. But today it had become something else entirely. A weapon against those who sought to destroy everything she represented. Hassan had been obsessed with capturing or killing the symbol of American military medicine's refusal to abandon the wounded. Instead, he had discovered that some angels carry swords as well as healing hands. As the helicopter carried them back to base, Maria looked down at the valley where Hassan's network had finally been broken. Somewhere below, SEAL teams were collecting intelligence that would lead to the capture or elimination of dozens of other insurgent fighters. The Angel of Fallujah had done more than survive Hassan's trap. She had turned it into his downfall. Rodriguez was right, she thought. It had been either very brave or very crazy, but in the end, it had been exactly what the situation required, and Maria Santos had never been one to back down from doing what was necessary, no matter how dangerous it might be. The Angel of Fallujah would continue flying, continue healing, and when necessary, continue fighting for the lives of those who couldn't fight for themselves.